Hello and welcome back to the Migration Mapper demo series. My name is Jerod Merkle and I'm an assistant professor at the University of Wyoming and a research associate with the Wyoming Migration Initiative. This video is going to be an overview, a demonstration of App 5 or Module 5, where we actually synthesize all of the footprints and occurrence distributions that you created in App 4 for every sequence of data per season. And you can merge those or bring them together to create yourself a population level output that is either going to be an area of corridor use, of movement corridor use, or an area of high use itself, where animals spend a lot of time. And to explain that, I'm going to use my handy dandy PowerPoint thing here. And so the first thing that we have to do is, you can imagine that we have multiple occurrence distributions and footprints for different individuals, for different years and different seasons. And so we have to talk about, or we have to tell Migration Mapper, how do we want to merge those together to create one occurrence distribution or footprint per individual. So there's some different options here. We can merge across years first, then across seasons, or across seasons, then across years. And then what we're going to do is we're going to calculate two things. One, population corridors. Two, population high use areas. So let's look at the corridors first. So the population corridors are based on footprints of each individual animal. And basically what Migration Mapper does is stack them up and look, where does the majority of these animals move in the same areas. And so what it can create is this raster, or this grid, that tells you the proportion of a population that uses any kind of area. And then what we can do at the final step is then delineate a main area. We can delineate different contours of these proportions or percentages. And so let's say you're interested in areas where at least 20% of the animals go, or 50% of the animals go, etc. And that's going to provide you your main movement corridor. Now, the population high use areas is a bit different. So in this case, we have a number of individual animals occurrence distributions, and then we stack those up, take a mean, and that will give us, where do individuals in the population spend the most time. And then again, we can delineate a contour of these to identify, okay, or here's 10% of the area, or 20% of the area, or 10% of the volume of that use. Where are the high use areas on that landscape? And that we can call high use areas. So those are important areas for the animals to spend time while they're moving. Okay, so that's what we're going to do conceptually. And here's how it looks within Migration Mapper. So the first thing we're going to do is it asks us which seasons do we want to work with. And so I'm looking to make a migration corridor right now that incorporates both seasons, fall and spring. And so I'm going to put both of those in here. Choose any UDs or footprints you would like to drop from the merging. So you can remove any individuals right here if you wanted to remove them. And then the next question is what order would you like to calculate your merged occurrence distributions or footprints? The footprints, it doesn't really matter, because if you merge a footprint in different ways, it doesn't mean much. But it might matter if you're interested in the UDs. So it might matter if you did year first, then season, or season first, then year. In fact, I'm going to delete this. I'm going to do year first, then season. And what we have now is a number of configuration parameters. And so this is the first one, is for the population use. These are all the contours we're going to calculate for the main use areas. So we're going to look at where the 5% contour, 10%, 15, up to 90. If you want to change these, there's some instructions here. You can change the contour type, whether those contours represent the area. So 5% of the area, 10% of the area, or if it's volume. So is it the top 5% of the volume of that occurrence distribution, 20% of the volume, et cetera, et cetera. Then once at the end here, everything's in app 4 is in grid format. And so when you first create these kind of derived products, everything will look gridded. And so this is some code to, if you want it to be smoothed out and look a little bit more smooth. So you can do true, I want them smooth, and this is some parameters to help with that smoothing. Okay, then we have the population footprints. These are the parameters here. And I know this says contours of volume of area of use, but this is actually representing percent of animals using an area. It has nothing to do with the volume or area of use. We'll fix that in the next revision. And so this final product will have a polygon that represents where 5% or more of the population uses, or 10% or more of the population uses, et cetera, et cetera. And then the same, and then there's a little bit of extra things here. If you want to, if there's like little small polygons in your outputs that are less than 20,000 square meters, which I think is a handful of hectares, that'll actually drop it. Or if there's a little tiny hole within a polygon, it'll fill that hole too. So these are some values if you want to change that for your situation. Now I'm going to put year and ID, and so it means by year, then by ID, and then finally by season. And so once we're ready there, we can click begin merging. They'll ask you a name for this, and we'll just call this migration all. Click continue. And if you go into your final out, there's a new, if you go into your project folder, there'll be a new folder called final outputs. And inside migration all, so it'll show your footprints. Oh, maybe it's not done yet. So this is the population utilization distribution. These are the different years. So within each year, each individual in each year. And then here are the final 2-year values. And then here's the population use contour as a shapefile. There's also going to be some areas, so you know how much area each contour represents. And it'll give you some metadata about this population. So it's 8 individual IDs, 32 sequences, 2 unique years, 2 unique seasons, et cetera, et cetera. And then we'll have the same thing for the population footprints merged. So this is a TIFF file of the proportion of animal IDs. And so every pixel will have how many animals from your population use that area. This grid is actually, each pixel represents the number of animals. So this proportion IDs is just the number of IDs divided by how many animals were in this entire population or data set that you used. This is footprint metadata. This is again, how many animals, how many sequences, years, et cetera, et cetera. And then this is the contours for the footprint as a shapefile. This is the footprint contour areas. And I'll show you in a minute what that means. So anyway, there's lots of information that has been developed here in your final outputs. And so once we've done that, now we can pop over to app 6. And now it will automatically populate with the new layers that we added. And so we can zoom in here and add our migration all population use corridors, and then all footprint corridors. And this doesn't show you all the details. There's some layer details to them. But you could open it up in ArcGIS or Arc and see the different layers. And maybe I'll pause that and get that ready. Okay, so now I'm in ArcGIS and I can show you basically the fine scale details of what you just did. So first off, these are the migration lines in the fall. These are the migration lines in the spring that you can see right now. Those ended up turning into this population use corridor. So this kind of gives us the 90 is the kind of low use, that's 90% of the area. And then the 5% is the top 5% of the area where the animals spent the most time. So that's the use result. And then this is the footprint corridor. So this is where the 1 is where 1 or more animals went. The 2 is where 2 or more animals went. And then any value above that is going to give you the percentage of the population that uses an area. So this red area is 30% of the population uses that area, which basically tells us that probably 3 or more animals are using that area. A couple other more interesting things you can do here is that proportion of IDs gives you an idea of where the proportions are of animals. And then there's the number of animal IDs, which in this case is a little bit silly, but the proportion is very useful. And if you look at these, the shape files, they basically have polygons and there's the contour values related to those polygons. So this is 1 or more animals, 2 or more, and then 30% of the population. You'll see 20%, 10%, 5% as well, but if they're not available, it'll be dropped from the output. So there was no areas where 10% of the animals went, but there were areas where 30% or more went. And then same with the use corridors. They'll have all these contours. Those are all the 90s, the 80s, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, well, that's it for app 5 and a little bit of visualization in app 6. Thank you very much.